Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking your time for this Saturday afternoon. I would like to request that everyone to stay muted during the entirety of the events. I would like to welcome Mr. Melvin Yong, a PAP Mental Health Group Member of Parliament, Radin Mas, SMC, to give his opening address for Day 2 of CFL Self-Harm Prevention Month online talks. Mr. Yong, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you, and my sincere thanks to Caring for Life for organizing this important conversation. Mental health affects every one of us, whether as youths navigating growing pressures or working adults juggling a myriad of responsibilities. Yet, despite how common these experiences are, it is still not always easy to talk about them openly. In Singapore, we are generally comfortable discussing performance, productivity, and progress. But when the conversation turns to how we are coping emotionally, the room can become noticeably quieter. That is why today's conversation matters. Non-suicidal self-injury, or NSSI, remains a significant mental health concern in Singapore. The National Youth Mental Health Study, which surveyed 2,600 youths aged 15 to 35, found that 1 in 4 youths, that's 25% of the respondents, had engaged in NSSI at least once in their lifetime, with nearly 7% reporting doing so in the past year. The median age of onset was just 14 years old. 14, a reminder that struggles can begin much earlier than many of us expect. The study also found higher rates among those experiencing severe depression or anxiety, and among youths who relied on avoidant coping strategies. Conversely, youths with stronger resilience and healthier coping skills were less likely to engage in NSSI. The message is therefore clear. Early identification matters. Resilience can be nurtured, and coping skills can be strengthened. Timely, compassionate support can change lives. At the People's Action Party, we believe that a strong and resilient society is one where individuals feel safe to seek help without fear of stigma. Mental health has therefore become an increasing national priority, with continued efforts to strengthen services, expand community support networks, and improve mental health literacy. Beyond policy, the PAP Mental Health Group works closely with community stakeholders to raise awareness and promote timely support within the community. Mental health must be supported not only in hospitals and clinics, but also in schools, workplaces, and the neighborhoods, wherever people live, learn, and work. Often, the first line of support is not a professional, but a friend, a colleague, a teacher, or a family member who notices and cares. We have seen this through collaborations such as the IMH Wellness Fiesta, which highlighted how everyday activities can contribute meaningfully to well-being, and through initiatives like the Makan Buddies, which foster peer support within the F&B sector. These efforts may look different on the surface, but they share a common purpose: to build environments where people feel safe to speak up and confident to seek support. Ultimately, advancing mental health well-being is a whole-of-nation effort. Let us continue building a culture where asking for help is seen as courage, not weakness, where checking in on someone is a habit, not an exception, and where no one feels they must suffer in silence. If each of us leaves today's gathering committed to one small action, one conversation, one act of support, one moment of listening, we will move closer to a society where mental health is openly supported and conversations happen without fear or judgment. Thank you for being part of this important journey, and I wish all of you a meaningful discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yong. I would like to invite Mr. Alex Yeo Executive Director of CFL, to give his sharing. Alex, please.
Um, Thank you, Dean. Hi, everyone. Just to check in any form of indication, whether you can raise your hand behind the camera or just type in the chat, it's me or things like that. Who here has attended our part one of the self-harm prevention talk? Any form of indication? Okay, yes, I did. Okay, good, good. Okay, okay. Okay, very good. Many of you did. Thank you. And in that part one itself, I've done quite a formal introduction. So today I'm just going to be a little bit informal, right? And I have to say that this topic is something that's very close to many of our hearts, right? For me, there was this one conversation that I had with a youth that I think is something that's going to probably just follow me for life. Um, in one of the youth engagement that we did, there was this one particular individual. He came forward, right, and he asked me this question. He said, "Alex, I'm currently supporting two friends who are on self-harm and suicide tendency. I do not know what to do, but I all I can do is I just keep on supporting them, but it felt non-stop and I'm exhausted myself. So I'm not sure what to do next." And I think it's conversion like this that reminds me that when it comes to supporting a person, at the end of the day, it's really a many helping hand approach. And the whole community has a role to play in supporting that person in distress. So a quick recap of what I've learned from part one from Dr. Calvin Ng on the sharing of self-harm. If you have not seen it, go check out our YouTube channel. The video is already uploaded for you to go and watch. I think it was very informative. A few key things that I've learned, right? Number one is that the lifetime prevalence of non-suicidal self-injury among youths in Singapore is 25%. That's 1 in 4. And the median age of onset is 14 years old. So that to me is already an indication that there's a lot we need to do in terms of early identification, right? At the same time, significantly more female than male who engage in non-suicidal self-injury during their lifetime, and more female than male engage in repetitive non-suicidal self-injury. That to me is also another big sign that we need to really continue to follow up. But one additional point that which is of why this whole self-harm is of interest to Caring for Life is because he also mentioned that the risk of self-harm within 12 months after a presentation to services with self-harm is about 30 times higher than in general population. Now, of course, I'm not assuming that all those who have attempted self-harm means they are suicidal. There is step towards checking in to see what are their mental state and what are their intents. But at the same time, this reminds us on the importance of early identification and early intervention, which is why it makes today's talk so important and something that's so helpful for me. And I hope you're going to be for everyone else as well. And that is, what can we do if we have identified someone who has attempted self-harm? If you want to know more about self-harm itself, I again want to encourage you to go to our YouTube channel to check out the part one video by Dr. Calvin Ng. But today, let us all come together to learn how do we support that individual who have done or carried out NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. So with that, I hope that you're going to have you'll have a very insightful learning today. If you have any questions, just post in the Zoom chat. Later on, if we have time, we'll try to conduct a Q&A or discussion. During part one, because it was so informative, we didn't have the chance to. But today, even if we didn't have the chance to do the Q&A, just post it there, we'll collate, right? And we'll try to address them even after the session. Just a gentle reminder that today's session will be recorded and be uploaded on the YouTube channel. So if you feel that you have friends or family members who's going to benefit from today's content, please share the video out. This is the kind of knowledge that I hope all of us can be equipped with so that we can learn how to care for that person in distress together. Thank you so much. Back to you, Dean.
Thank you, Alex. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the talk will start soon. Do note that during the talk, if you wish to talk to anyone, please feel free to message via Zoom to our volunteers. They have the word CFL right next to their names, and they'll send you to a separate room in Zoom. Once again, kindly stay muted on Zoom during the duration of the talk. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Ms. Lyon to give her sharing on understanding self-harm in children and teenagers, and CFL's Director Alex as the moderator during the question and answer segment of the talk. Miss Leon, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Dean. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Let me share my screen. Okay, great. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Leon. I'm a social worker by training and currently working in the community youth mental health setting with Shine Children and Youth Services. So firstly, I think I would really like to say a big thank you to CFL for organizing this webinar series and having me today to share. Self-harm, or more specifically NSSI, can be quite an invisible issue in society, and that also perpetuates the stigma associated around it. So to me, I think that today's sharing is a chance to raise awareness through contributing what I know, and hopefully you'll find this session helpful. So let me also begin by giving a very quick sharing of Shine for those who are new to us. So we are a social service agency serving children and youth aged 5 to 25 years old. We're set up in 1976, so we turned 50 years old this year. And our mission and vision is really to be able to maximize the potential of children and youth. And how we do it is really through a wide range of services, including education, psychology-related assessment and community interventions, to supporting and uplifting children and youth in schools, in communities, and improving social mobility, as well as engaging in deep specialized expertise with specific target profiles, such as youth who have committed offending behaviors, and also really going upstream with crime prevention, as well as also capability building with research, training, and consultancy arm. Yeah, but last but not least, which is where I'm from, I'm actually from the youth mental health group of Shine. And the mental health group of Shine, we have a unique name. So it's called Resilience. I don't know if any of you here have heard of us before. So we serve youth aged 12 to 25. And really our focus is on supporting youth with varying levels of mental health needs in the community who are keen for any form of professional support to strengthen their well-being and also work towards recovery. So we also do a lot of work in promoting help seeking, as we believe that early intervention is the best intervention for mental health, and also working closely with caregivers to support them in supporting their children's mental well-being. So just a fun fact, we didn't misspell resilience. So we do know how to spell, but it's intentionally misspelled because back then we wanted to draw attention to the unspoken challenges of youth struggling with mental health, as well as also some of the stigma around it, and to highlight the strengths and assets of youth. And those of you are familiar with capybara, so if you see, that's our mascot called Charlie. So it's a capybara who actually are known for being very zen and grounded. So for us, the reason why I thought I could actually also share a bit more very briefly about us is also, I guess that all of you here will be quite curious on also some of the mental health services in the community in alignment with the focus of the talk. So I thought just briefly to share, I think for Shine, we focus on serving the mental health needs of youth in various service regions where we are appointed the main service provider, like the West, the Northeast, but we also have services that cater island-wide. And for working with youth, we really need to go beyond the conventional one-to-one therapeutic support at times. So we have various unique approaches such as journey-based peer supporting, animal-assisted services through CATS, co-production, so working with the youth service users themselves to come up with mental health services, digital mental health platforms, the arts, and really tapping on volunteerism. So for any of you who are just keen to know a bit more about us, you can actually find us on our social media platforms on Instagram, TikTok, or our website. Okay, so that's just really a short sharing about Shine. I think today's focus of the talk was really looking at emotional and physical first aid for those children and youth who have engaged in NSSI. And I believe that all of you here, you play different roles in your personal and professional life. And there are times where maybe we may encounter people who are at risk of or engaging in NSSI and we are not sure what to do. So my hope is that through today's talk, you would be able or more aware on how do you effectively provide support as a first responder to people who might be at risk of or engaging in NSSI. And the focus here is really not so much to equip you with all the skills because we only have a 2-hour webinar, but really to also understand the foundational knowledge that can guide you in some of the considerations that you will take, because every situation of support is quite different. And we are definitely not here to prescribe what will be the way forward because you will know the person that you're supporting the best. But at the same time, I also need to caveat that because it is a 2-hour session, so we will have to stay quite focused. And some of the topics that are beyond the scope of the talk would be, for example, the longer term treatment of NSSI or specific medical knowledge related to physical first aid. Yeah, so I definitely wouldn't want to misguide everyone, given my training is not in the medical field. So I thought I just wanted to highlight that as well. Okay, so how the talk will begin is I will start off first with also an introduction session, very brief because I know some of you have not attended the session on Saturday, which is two Saturdays ago. Yeah, so I'll start off really just to briefly introduce NSSI, and more importantly, some of the common misperceptions. So that is because the misperceptions out there in society about NSSI can be quite prevalent. It can be more common than we know. And one of the things that really influence the way we can respond to people is really our own self-awareness about how do we even see NSSI, what's our relationship with NSSI, and also then from there I will also provide more knowledge on some of the first aid principles. We'll go into a bit of psychological first aid and some of the things to note in common situations. And at the end of the day, I think like what Alex was sharing, we also cannot forget to take care of ourselves as we support others. So that is something that we'll go briefly into as well. Okay, so this I hope would be a safe space for learning. And if I want to make it a safe space for learning, it would be quite helpful to also have all of us to agree on a few key group agreements. I think firstly, in terms of respect, really respecting each other with what you put in the chat, and also be able to respect privacy, where if anyone has shared anything, it's really to keep it also within this session, though I know it'll be recorded, of course. And I think respect also means also being open to various perspectives. So some of the things I might share today might challenge your views. So also hoping that we can keep that space open and also respecting time. So I'll do my best to try to keep within the time we have. So do bear with me if I choose to perhaps maybe go faster for certain parts or to be able to save certain parts for Q&A if needed. Yeah, and I think another thing that's very important, which is choice. This is also giving everybody the choice to decide how best you want to engage, how much to participate. So some of you might be comfortable just leaving your camera off. That's okay. Some of you might want to on it, you want to put questions in the chat. So that really depends on our comfort level. And I think the last but not least is really care for one another. So if there's anything you want to, for example, you can like somebody's comment or really provide certain reactions along the way to convey our care to each other. I think that would be really nice. And some of this is also backed by the trauma-informed principles that I think is also so relevant to this topic as well. Okay, last but not least, before we jump into the content, similarly, I think to what Dean has shared, NSSI is a topic that can be heavy and potentially triggering. So if any of you at any point in time experience any kind of distress, feel free to disengage. Or if you feel that you need someone to talk to, you can actually search for our CFL facilitators and be sent to another room. Or if let's say distress persists even after this session, there are also some of the hotlines that you can turn to as well. All right. Okay, so with that, then for now, I will go into the first segment, which is really how we understand and view NSSI. So this is the part where a bit of audience interaction is helpful. So for those of you, I know some might be using their phone and maybe it's a bit difficult, but for those of you who have the chance to, perhaps I could invite you to go to the menti.com and really key in the code 78629196. Okay, so I will also switch to my screen so that we can also look at the Menti website. So let me share screen again. Okay, so the purpose of this is really firstly for me to know who is in the room. Yeah, because I would really love for this to have been physical, of course, but given that it's virtual, we will have other ways to really find out who is here with us. So I do see the general trend would be that those of us here might be towards, I guess, the middle age and above, probably caregivers as well. Yeah, so I will always be interested on whether there are youths who join our sharing. For now, I don't think so, but I think this is just for us to get a sense of who's in the room. And then if I were to go to the next slide, okay, So this is quite important for me also. So it's really what's your role. Yeah, so your role meaning actually what role might have prompted you to sign up for this talk. Yeah, so it is okay to have two roles, right? Because sometimes we play dual roles in our lives. We could be a helping professional but parent at the same time. But having me to also understand the audience will allow me to maybe see what parts I can emphasize on later. Because today's talk is really meant to be quite broad-based. Yeah, so I'll do my best to try and cater to everybody's needs. Yeah, but for now, I do see that most of the people in the room seem to be helping professionals, and definitely, of course, with caregivers. Um, yeah, I think those who are here to want to support their friend, lesser of a teacher or educators, I see, and of course, there's the others category as well. Hmm. So a shout out for those helping professionals. What I shared today, feel free to also add on as well, so that we can all learn together for the rest of the audience. Okay. All right. I'll go to the next slide. So I just want to get a sense of the trend of who's in the room. But some of these next few slides will then be a bit more critical for me to also bring us into this topic. Yeah. So it's really, do you know someone who has engaged in NSSI before? So I'll give some time. Okay, it seems like there are more people in this room who have engaged with someone who has engaged in NSSI before, but a couple of you are probably here to want to learn first in case you might encounter somebody. Okay. However, the next important question then would be, have you responded to someone who has engaged in NSSI before? Because there are situations where we know, but we might not have the chance to talk to the person or engage the person. So I just want to get a sense again, who has responded to someone who has engaged in NSSI before? Okay, so in this case, I think the more people put no, which is why you are here, I'm guessing. And of course, there are people who have, and later on, if we do have the time, maybe we could also hear some sharings as well for some of these responses. Okay, all right. Okay, last but not least, just a very quick gathering of views. What do you think are some attitudes and or perceptions that people in Singapore have about NSSI? Yeah, so do bear in mind that whatever you put here might not be representative of what you think or what you feel, but or it could be as well, feel free. But really, what do you think are some attitudes and or perceptions that people in Singapore have about NSSI? So maybe what you have heard from people around you, just your assumptions maybe about how the society views it. Okay, I see someone with no idea how to help. So we'll give a bit of time. I think this is an important question and I'll share a bit more why later. Okay, let's briefly go through this. Okay, no idea how to help. Minority seeking attention. Surprised. Sad. Suicidal. Don't know why they do things like to themselves. I like that some of us have already had certain misperceptions corrected. So I see this part about how many thought it was action to attract attention, which is incorrect. And this is actually a very important thing about it being a taboo. Yeah, so actually NSSI has been an issue that's been quite invisible for a while and it tends to be underreported. So whatever that's being reported out there, likely the percentage of people engaging in it could be much higher. Yeah, but if we look at it, right, wouldn't we agree that all the attitudes and perceptions are actually quite negative? Yeah, so for example, things like the term stupid or peer pressure, isolated and fearful, silly, just stop doing it. There's a tinge of judgment even sometimes that can come across when we think about self-harm and NSSI. Yeah, and of course, sometimes it is not talked about, not because of negative perceptions about it, but because people don't understand it, they are fearful. We tend to be fearful of things we don't understand, right? Yeah, so It could be because we don't understand, so we also don't know how to support, and therefore we try to refrain even talking about it or bring it up in any kind of conversation, or that could be some of the barriers as well that prevent people from seeking support. Yeah. Okay, so with this, I thought why I put this question here, it's really for us to have a sense of what people around us could be saying about NSSI. And my hope is that through today, and even also those who have attended the session by Dr. Kevin 2 weeks ago, we can be advocates also to be able to perhaps also update some of the perceptions for them to be also better corrected. Because at the end of the day, if you're really looking at breaking a stigma on NSSI, I do think that some of these attitudes and perceptions will need to be tackled. Okay, so with that, let me stop share. Okay, so what you all have actually shared in terms of the attitudes have also assured me that it's good for me to rehash some of the, okay, it's good for me to also rehash some of the misperceptions about NSSI, which I will share a bit more later, and then we can have more discussion on it. Okay, so let me just begin with really looking at self-harm. I won't go into this too much, but although we often talk about self-harm as a very colloquial term for NSSI, self-harm as a term actually is much broader. Yeah, so it includes a range of services from NSSI to even suicide as well. However, today we are focusing on NSSI, defined as deliberate self-directed damage of body tissue without suicidal intent, so that is critical, and for purposes not socially or culturally sanctioned. Yeah, so for example, piercing, let's say ear piercing or that, we might not consider that. Yeah, so we also do look at the social and cultural side of things as well. And it's often also sometimes referred to as DSH, deliberate self-harm. And some of the common methods would include cutting, so like could be cut not only just using like a blade and all that for cutting, but even carving words on skin, and burning could involve, for example, cigarettes like the match. Blunt force, so that's also one category of behavior. So for example, he's banging the head against the wall, and the other category is what we commonly call as minor tissue damage. So for example, preventing wounds from healing, severe scratching, sticking needle. Yeah, so some of these are the common methods of self-harm or NSSI that we do see. And to note, it's not a mental health disorder, though it was included in the DSM-5 as a condition for further study, but self-harm or NSSI is commonly regarded as a symptomatic behavior of mental health struggles and conditions. So this is a concerning trend that has been pointed out by the MP Melvin just now, and also Alex. So I won't go too much into this. So it's really drawn from the National Youth Mental Health Study. But the key message of this to me is it is really much more common than we think. And this, I would believe that perhaps some of these figures might be underreported as well. Yeah, so and this can occur at a really young age. So if early detection and intervention does not happen, this could lead to detrimental downstream effects that not only impact mental well-being, but also the safety of the person. So then I think we really need to re-look at some of the common misconceptions around NSSI. So the first, I think like what appeared in the Menti just now, right? The term suicidal. Yeah, so is it true that youths who engage in NSSI are also suicidal? Yes and no. Okay, so why do I say that? So firstly, I think we really need to distinguish NSSI and suicide with regards to the intent of whether or not the person wants to end their lives. Yeah, and some of the other slight distinctions could be that NSSI can be done on impulse. It might or might not involve detailed planning, but for suicide, those of you who might be familiar with suicide interventions at all, the ideation attempt typically also could involve a bit more concreteness in terms of some of the ideas on how the plan could be carried out, like specific time, place, method. Yeah, so even though NSSI and suicide are different, but they can be interrelated or they can happen concurrently for an individual. Yeah, so there's definitely research that shows the association. And sadly to say, there's been also research that really shows NSSI's presence as a risk factor for suicide. Yeah, and even if somebody who engages in NSSI does not intend to die, it does not mean it's not serious, because there could still have be life-threatening consequences because the method could be more fatal. So that's something for us to note. All right, the second misconception that I will go through is really, firstly, some people think that NSSI is a phase that the young person will outgrow. Yeah, so it's not true. So it is important to support the young person with it, because if left without timely intervention or support, like what I mentioned, there could be a deterioration in mental health as well as safety risk. Yeah, so when we put it out in this way, I think we also thinking about the implication behind some of these misconceptions, right? Because some of the responses you get is, oh, I don't worry, this person will go out of it. Then the implication could be that the person might not then get the access to the support that he or she might benefit from. Yeah, so that's also something to note as well. And another key misconception is that anyone who engages in NSSI can stop themselves if they put their minds to it. Yeah, so actually just now that came up also, right, in the mentee survey, where you think of people saying, why can't they stop, or just stop it? However, stopping NSSI behaviors, it may not be as simple as a matter of willpower, because when somebody engages in NSSI and continues to do so, it's usually because it has served a useful function for them, related to their reason for engaging in it in the first place. Yeah, so if you think about all of us, right, actually in all the things that we do, even sometimes some of us might also engage in self-sabotaging behaviors at times, right? But usually when we do things, it is because it serves a certain need of ours. Yeah, so if we think about NSSI, which I'll go through very briefly about the reasons later on, is really related to feeling better from the emotional pain. And biologically, those of you who might be familiar, is there are actually grounds for this. Uh, there are grounds for NSSI to be useful for the use in feeling better, because biologically, when one person engages in NSSI, the body does respond. There's a release of endorphins, which can provide temporary relief from the pain and improve mood as well. Yeah, so it may not be that easy for someone who has already started to rely on NSSI to find another coping mechanism that can attain the same effect and relief. However, of course, in the long run, we do need to support the person to find other more healthier ways of coping. But I thought that this is an important point, because if let's say we think that a person can change just simply by willpower, we could be setting the person up for failure. That could be one, where let's say the person goes back to the cycle, or it could be setting yourself up for failure when you want to support somebody. All right. Another misconception. So sometimes we can be too quick to associate self-harm behaviors with being manipulative or attention-seeking. And when that happens, so just now actually, if you look through the mentee responses, you will see that come out a lot. Yeah, so what we are saying is, when we are too quick to associate NSSI with attention-seeking, manipulative, we perpetuate this stigma of NSSI, and we lose sight of the fact that actually many individuals who engage in NSSI, they are typically quite ashamed, and they typically want to hide their behaviors. Yeah, so actually, those of you who may have encountered individuals who have engaged in NSSI, at least for myself, they typically would engage in certain parts of the body that you won't be able to see so straightforwardly. Yeah, so if we keep thinking of NSSI, we think manipulative or attention seeking, and continue to perpetuate this stigma, it ironically actually makes it harder for people who engage in NSSI to seek help. Yeah, so I think this is something why it's very important to challenge this view, and this is something that I also share, where perhaps you can think of it another way, and I'll share about it later. Okay, so some people think that you self-injure for no good reason. And this has come up before, right? Even just now in the mentee, they get influence from friends, social media. This is something that I thought we should talk a bit more. So we may not understand why youth engage in NSSI, and therefore we might think that they do so for no good reason. They are weak, they're influenced by others. People ask them to do, then they still do. Which, if we think about it from a developmental point of view, of course, youth, they are still developing cognitively. They might not always make the best decisions. Their prefrontal cortex is still developing. However, I think if we jump into this conclusion straight away, the implication is that we might forget to really stop and think about or listen even to the actual reasons for why youth engage in NSSI. Yeah, so most of the time, at least from what I do see, it is true that sometimes engaging in this behavior might be triggered by the external factors. However, for it to continue, I think that is where we really need to look at some of the reasons for NSSI, which can differ from youth to youth. Yeah, so from our own experience, at least, most youths, when they are given a safe environment to share, they can actually articulate why they self-harm, even if they know it may not be the best for them. And like what I mentioned, while we might not agree with the behavior, but we must acknowledge that it does meet an underlying need of theirs, and it's really how then we can praise and support them to find other ways to be able to meet their needs. So just now I keep talking about the need, right? So actually, what is this need? And to me, I think there are various reasons for NSSI, and I thought I'll just put out the key theme, or at least what it looks like to me. Yeah, so the different reasons for NSSI usually point back to the same theme, which is really a desperate attempt to cope with emotional pain. Yeah, so most of the time we are most familiar with this function to release bottled up emotions, right? As a form of emotional coping, we need to feel better from emotional distress. And this is also when the youth might not have other methods that might be as effective, or they have not found something that works well for them. However, there are also other key reasons, such as self-punishment, sensitizing of self, turning aggression inwards, gaining sense of control or mastery. So what do some of this mean? Would be that some youth they engage in NSSI to punish themselves. And usually some of this are associated with experiencing high degree of guilt or shame. And sometimes when we think about also sensitizing of self, it is also related to, again, certain emotions like numbing or even dissociating. And turning aggression inwards, if you think about it, actually there's also a lot of anger. Maybe they don't know how to do, what to do with it, or how to express it. And this idea of also gaining sense of control and mastery is also linked back to the environment that they are in, right? Because if you are in a world that you feel very powerless, helpless, and trapped, and it's so emotionally painful, would then this be something that can help you feel that, okay, at least I still have something that I can control. Now, so some of these are also a bit more associated with potentially traumatic experiences that youth might have undergone, like adverse childhood experiences, which inflict a lot of emotional pain on them. And do bear in mind that while many of us here are probably sorry. Okay, so while many of us here are grown adults, I believe just based on that, when we think of youth, they are still developing a lot on their biologically, developmentally, emotionally. Yeah, so there's really a lot of turmoil in them. The last reason, which I thought is usually why we associate NSSI with attention seeking, is what I call social signaling, or also what the literature says. So it's basically what we think of when we think of cry for help. So they cannot think of any other way to let people know they are suffering, and so they engage in it. And if you think about it, for them to even do it to get people's care, or maybe to get people's attention, as some of you might call it, there must still be a degree of emotional pain that they'll experience if, let's say, nobody is caring about them, or it's really then back again to them taking certain efforts to help themselves to feel better. So if we think about all these different reasons, right, I think the key question that I have for everybody is really then what is our view and attitude towards NSSI? Yeah, so let me show. Okay, so I'm putting a mirror here. Definitely not a time where we'll stop and have a big group discussion, but just as something for you individually to kind of think about. I'll just share a bit about my own experience or how there was a shift in the way I saw NSSI, which influenced greatly the way that I responded. So the reason why this is important is because how we view NSSI, our attitudes, conscious or subconscious, it will influence the way we respond, whether we are aware or not. Yeah, so when I first learned about NSSI, right, how we always think about it as attention-seeking behavior, I realized then that people who engage in NSSI can be quite misunderstood by society, and they can be easily labeled, they can be easily judged, which then makes it more scary and difficult to seek support. Right. So at the same time, then I felt that it is something we really want to do something about, which is when I had a conversation also. So I also did a training on NSSI with a friend of mine who's also a clinical psychologist, and she had a way to rethink this that was really very helpful for me, a very important reframe. So instead of seeing NSSI as attention-seeking behavior, can we see it as a connection-seeking behavior? Because youth are actually seeking connection because they are suffering within and they don't know how to cope with the emotional pain. They don't know what they can do. And we don't want to define them by and their NSSI, right? Like we don't want to put the label that you're attention seeking. But then can we think of it as youth who are engaged in NSSI? They are individuals who need our support. They want our connection and they hope that we can understand them. Yeah, so when I'm able to shift and look at NSSI behavior as a connection seeking behavior, I think that also helps me to be more patient and to be also more empathetic even when I actually work and support youth who engage in it. So I really hope that all of us can take some time to also reflect about our own view and attitude towards NSSI because it can really determine how we can effectively respond. All right. Okay. So moving forward, then the question is actually how can we respond to someone who is at risk of or has engaged currently engaging in NSSI to ensure emotional and physical safety. Okay, so I'll just do a very simple poll in the chat. Very simple poll. So there are 4 scenarios here, right? So one would be if you suspect someone is engaging in NSSI, what will you do? Second would be if someone tells you that he or she is going to engage in NSSI, what will you do? And the third one would be if you walk in on someone engaging in NSSI, what would you do? And of course, if someone tells you he or she just engaged in NSSI, what would you do? So I hope you can put in the chat either A, B, C, or D, or if maybe to think about out of these 4 scenarios, right? Actually, which scenario do you find would be the most challenging for yourself to be in? Yeah, so maybe it's a scenario that you feel you'll be most stuck, most unsure what to do. Okay, so I see a lot of, so far I've seen a lot of C's. Keep it. I'm sure there's more people, so I'll let it run for a while. Hmm. Okay, I see C seems to be coming out the most. So some people also put A, some people put D. All of the above. Yeah. I was wondering if someone would say that, but I thought if I had to make your choose, which one would really stand out the most? Seems like C is the main scenario that most people find most challenging in. Okay. In fact, I think D is the least common scenario. Oh, okay. But then I see people put all. Yeah, so okay, keep the responses coming. It's definitely helpful. But if you really think about it, all these 4 scenarios can be quite scary especially if, let's say for those who have not engaged anyone who might have encountered self NSSI before. But my guess also why most of us think that C, okay, but I see that B and D are catching up. But the reason why most of us might think that C is the most challenging, it could also be because there's a crisis, right? And typically in crisis, it's more time sensitive and we are really looking at safety. Yeah, so some put C is an immediate thing, take out injury, this is more of the aftermath of doing again. Yes. Okay. So when I ask everybody to reflect on this question, it's really just to get a sense of where you are at. Because for those of you who are also feeling very stuck for all these scenarios, then I think what I will share next will be very helpful for you. Yeah, so I will be sharing about a cycle of NSSI that I find really very helpful for me in guiding the way that I respond in different situations. And those of you who have more experience and you have engaged different ones as well, for you, perhaps you could also see how what you have done will actually be fitting in with the cycle of NSSI. So before we jump into, of course, some of the strategies and the tips, which are not rocket science, right? I believe that many of us could be able to find it. I think what is more important is, do we also know enough to be able to then make thoughtful considerations about how we respond and be aware and stop ourselves from reacting? Yeah, so that is usually the key question when you think about any type of emotional first aid. Okay, thank you so much everybody for responding. I will just move on first in the interest of time. Okay. All right. So let me share about the cycle of NSSI. So sometimes we don't know how to respond because we do not understand the context of the behavior. We are not too sure, actually, we are always looking at it as what happened in front of us. So we might not look at it from, let's say, a longitudinal point of view. What led up to this? What's going to happen after this? So we might not be seeing what is truly happening. And this is where I find understanding the cycle of NSSI very helpful, at least for myself, to guide myself in sense making about what's really happening to the individual that we are responding to. So just now put a disclaimer, of course, that, think of this cycle as a guide, right? Because we also have to acknowledge that every youth is different. Yeah, so every youth at each different stage, they will have different thoughts, feelings, actions, method and severity of NSSI. All this could differ definitely based on factors, for example, how long they have been engaging in this, and so on and so forth. But the process of this cycle will stay largely the same. So I'll go through with everybody this cycle using just an example, so it can help us to also visualize how it could work. Okay, so let's start off with the first stage of the cycle, which is emotional suffering. Yeah, so let's take, for example, female youth that has experienced persistent bullying in school. Yeah, so let's try and, this is a hypothetical, so it definitely is not referencing anyone. Yeah, but it's really just for us to be able to understand this cycle more effectively. Yeah, so imagine a youth, she has gone through persistent bullying. Nobody knows. It has caused her a lot of internal emotional turmoil. People in the class, they ostracize her, they reject her on a daily basis. And then this definitely will affect mental well-being. It has caused her to also start to have negative thoughts about herself, whether she's good enough, why are people treating her this way? And there's also a lot of rumination. Yeah, so based on this negative thoughts, those of us who might be familiar could really affect the feelings, the behaviors, and a lot of emotional turmoil that's happening day after day. So then the next part of this cycle is the intensifying of the emotional suffering. So it intensifies to heighten emotional distress, where the youth starts to feel more emotionally overwhelmed. Yeah, so what could cause this? So perhaps, apart from the bullying, if we look at a youth, we also have to look at the environment, right? So apart from the bullying, the youth's parents could be fighting every day. The youth is scared and worried about whether they will divorce. And at the same time, there's also been another incident of bullying where she might be verbally abused and threatened, preventing her from reporting to a teacher. So she starts to feel very trapped, starts to feel very helpless about all these different things that's happening. She can't do anything about it. And also quite frightened about what could happen at the home and also in school every day. Yeah, so there's a lot more powerful feelings that's already happening, more heightened distress at this point. And then it would move on to what we call a panic stage. So as the intensity of the emotional distress increases, it peaks one day and evolves into panic when perhaps she finds out that, oh, my parents are going to divorce, right? And it could also be concurrently with the period that the teacher could have found out about the bullying through someone else. But it then worries her that, okay, oh dear, the teacher found out and maybe the threats by the bullies will come true. Yeah, so they might try to get back at me. And while all these things are happening, not to say that this youth is not trying to cope, right? Every of us, when we are experiencing negative emotions, we will try to cope in some way or another. The key question is it really helpful? Yeah, so she might have tried different methods, nothing is working. There's a sense of out of control, and a compelling urge to engage in NSSI, which she might have known through other means, such as maybe this where some of the exposure, be it like social media or other. Sometimes it is true that peers, they might talk about it. So the key question here is how distressing is it for the youth such that then the youth then decides that I might need to do something more extreme perhaps, but it helps me to feel better. Yeah, and that's where she engages in NSSI. And when she does so, like what I mentioned, the biological base of it, right? And there are endorphins released. It helps to bring down the level of emotional distress. It helps to alleviate the sense of panic that she's experiencing. And all of us who have actually experienced states of emotional overwhelm, we know it's not a good state to stay in. Yeah, so then what happens is through the act of NSSI, there starts to be a bit of relief. Yeah, from the distress, physiologically, I don't feel my heart beating so fast. I don't feel so uncomfortable anymore. I am calmer. are able to think more clearly, maybe even be in control. It doesn't feel as emotionally overwhelming, and I am better able to bear where I am at now in terms of the emotional and physiological arousal. However, then the key question is what happens after that, right? Because there is this part of the cycle known as the grief reaction. Yeah, so this is where you might start to realize, hey, oh no, what have I actually done? Yeah, and this causes the youth to feel shameful, guilty, or even disgusted at themselves, right? So it is fair to say that I'm quite sure that I'll use, even using this youth as an example, there is some sense that, okay, actually this behavior is not right. Yeah, and there's some worry of what if my parents find out, what if people find out, right? And this actually adds on to the existing emotional suffering, especially let's say using this example where the youth might be already having the thoughts of, I'm not good enough. And if in this case, let's say her parents find out, or her friends find out, or teacher find out, and they blame her for it, and they ask her to stop, and they put labels on her, wouldn't this potentially evoke some of the original emotions and negative thoughts about herself that then started the whole cycle in the first place? And then the cycle can continue over and over and over again. So the reason why I go through this cycle of NSSI, it might not be an unfamiliar cycle for some of you, but I think the key thing is what is it that we can glean from this cycle? Yeah, and what I thought is very helpful to point out is firstly, actually what we usually do not see is the level of emotional distress, the level of suffering and panic that the youth experiences. So for those of you who might have encountered someone who engaged in NSSI, maybe at that point in time, or they might have shared you afterwards, you don't see that happening because it's mostly internal, the emotional distress, the suffering, the panic, how much it consumes them. And I think that's important for us to remember that it's actually important to acknowledge and understand the distress and suffering and what was the tipping point that actually results in the panic and pushes them towards them engaging in this behavior. The other thing that's quite important to remember is also about the grief reaction that I talked about. Yeah, so sometimes we think, and for youth, sometimes it could be a defense reaction, right? Sometimes they may say, oh, I don't care. I think it's okay. I think it's good. However, there is some degree of guilt and shame that occurs when they engage in this behavior. Yeah, because we are taught, right, that this is not right. Yeah, and if the people around them, they react in a way, if let's say we react in a way to them that could actually worsen these feelings of guilt and shame, it might, like what I mentioned, perpetuate the whole cycle again because it could heighten emotional suffering, lead to distress, panic, and so on and so forth. So the way we respond then becomes very critical, where we cannot assume that they don't feel anything about it, they actually do. And the last part is gaining insights into why stopping NSSI behaviors might not be as easy as it seems. So I shared a bit earlier about this, right? And when we think about engaging NSSI behaviors, I fully get that, it's harmful to ourselves, right? Our body, and it really does not make sense to many of us, right? Why would we want to harm ourselves? Yeah, but if you really think about this cycle again, actually, what is the function of them engaging in NSSI as emotional coping? There is indeed a result for them that continues to attract them to do this again and again. Yeah, which is why the part of how it can be addictive, right? Because it does induce feelings of relief, even if it's for a very short while. But it is really being able to bring them out of that emotional overwhelm and highly distressed state very quickly, bringing it down, helping them to feel more in control. And that is something that every one of us we definitely can relate to, right? That's why the importance of us learning how to regulate ourselves. So if a youth does not know other ways of managing and tolerating the emotional distress, and they are constantly in a state of emotional distress, and this cycle continues to happen, we could then understand why it's not as simple as just telling them to stop and they will stop. Because then what is the other effect of it is that they continue to be feeling this emotional distress which they cannot sit with. Yeah, so I think it's not possible to expect them to stop overnight, especially for those who have engaged in it for very long. And in fact, actually some youth, right, they might even see it as helping them. Yeah, because if nobody in the environment can help them feel better, but this method helps me, then I think it's a useful method. I don't want to change. So sometimes we do experience youth seeing this way, and we can understand it from a short-term point of view, but always the angle is always from a long-term point of view, how helpful and is it really the best for your own safety. Yeah, so regardless, I think this could actually give us some insights about why youth continue to engage in self-harm and what can we do to pace along with them. Okay, so I would like to then jump into a bit on the first aid part of things, right? So now that we have a better understanding about the cycle. So when we think about first aid, I know although the title of this talk was emotional and physical first aid, but we cannot ignore this really key part of psychological first aid. Yeah, and I wanted to then draw us back to this look, listen, and link model. So it's adapted from the World Health Organization, is their psychological first aid model, and use that to guide us so that all of us will have a framework in mind and we know how to maybe apply it in this situation. So I want to put it out very clearly that when we are responding, our goal is not to solve the NSSI. NSSI can be a very complex issue, as like what I mentioned, there are a lot of other factors we need to think about. But the key thing is how can we support them there and there, right? So 3 Ls. First would be look, right? So observe the person and the environment. It is at least for me, sometimes it's more difficult than what we think, right? Because when you observe, it's really about paying attention to the verbals, what the person is saying, to the non-verbal, what the person is not saying, but how you can see their facial expression, their body movements, their behaviors, and also paying attention to the environment, right? Actually, is this a good environment for us to continue this conversation? What's happening in the environment? Are there potentially harmful objects around? So these are things that we need to be mindful about as we start to engage the person. So the first would be to look, right? And the second would be to listen. Yeah, so this would be the most critical piece, at least for me, I feel, because when we are able to properly listen to them, create that safe environment for them to share, if we think about it, actually that also helps them in the emotion regulation. Yeah, and of course, it is important that we are able to listen actively, help them feel heard, and also listen in a way that encourages them to continue to share. Yeah, because if we talk in negative terms and immediately scold them or immediately question them, actually it might cause them to withdraw and not want to talk about it. And of course, keeping the focus on them. So this is some of these things that I say is easier said than done. I think some of you here might experience it, but this is where we try and learn and really help ourselves to remind ourselves as much as we can. Right. So keeping the focus on them means not going and saying that, oh, telling your own story, maybe about how you overcame a situation, or maybe telling other people's story about how they overcame that situation. And of course, sometimes we do it and share with good intent, but then that could actually discourage them from sharing about their own internal experiences. So how we listen is very critical, and I will share a bit of tips later on what could actually be helpful in this step of listening. And of course, at the end of the day, it's really how do we link them up with resources? How do we help them to seek more support and journey with them, but also pace with them? Yeah, so look, listen, link. I will share a bit more about also how it can be applied in the various scenarios. I think at least some of the key strategies to remember. But I think the key thing I just want to highlight again here is really to keep in mind that it's not about solving the NSSI or because this is not something that at least for all of us, if we think about it, definitely more from a layperson point of view as well. There are professionals that could come in to support with that. Yeah, so what we are trying to do is really to ensure the person is safe, help the person to cope with more support, and be able to also support the person in journeying through their own journey in maybe also recovering and engaging in lesser NSSI across time, finding better ways to cope, and hopefully then be able to not engage in it at all. Okay. Okay, I'm just taking a look at some of the questions because okay. So I think at the speed I'm going, we should be able to answer some of these questions later. So let me just keep that in mind. Okay, let me continue first, then later on we will attend to some of these questions. Okay, so just like what I mentioned, look, listen, and link. So when you think about listen and link, it sounds simple, but it may not be as simple as it seems. And I just want to highlight some of the key things that would be helpful. So when we really break down listen, right, we are also thinking about how do we express concern, right? How do we help them to share more? So this is the part where these 3 yellow boxes are helpful tips for us when we express concern. Yeah, so instead of saying that, why do you make me so worried? versus, I'm very concerned about what's going to happen in terms of your health if this continues. So that it would be a difference in also how the other person at the receiving end takes it and whether the person would really be able to sense that genuine care and concern, or perhaps misunderstand it as you're trying to blame or trying to guilt trip. Yeah, so this is the part where I just want to highlight that sometimes we show concern, but if we don't think about how we do that, it could be misinterpreted as guilt tripping. Yeah, and sometimes it's also because they are in a state where they might already be thinking very badly about themselves. Yeah, so anything you share perhaps could be more easily misconstrued as you are blaming me, I'm not good, and then that could also cause them to spiral further. So the key thing really is to highlight concern for their safety, for their well-being. And usually, at least based on my experience, when we are very sincere in showing that we do care for them as a person, for their safety and well-being, they are able to take it in. So that's for expressing concern. How about active listening, right? So for active listening, I'm sure, given there's quite a lot of helping professionals here, I think some of you might be quite familiar, but just want to highlight a few key tips that could be quite relevant. I think again also for this issue. So the first would be ask, but avoid pressuring them to talk. Yeah, because NSSI, like what I mentioned, it can be seen as a very private issue, but at the same time, it's an issue laden with a lot of judgments. Yeah, so everyone has their own readiness on how much they want to share at what point. So if you keep pressure rising, I think that might backfire at times. So it's really the importance of being able to ask openly, but at the same time, being able to also allow yourself to have the patience to let them know that they can actually share according to their pace. So acknowledging and reflecting the experience is also a very important part, but you cannot acknowledge and reflect the experience without also being able to, um, I guess, being able to manage yourself. Yeah, so what do I mean by that, right? Because sometimes, when we are working with, or when we are actually supporting someone who might engage in NSSI, actually that could cause us a lot of distress, right? And that could then distract us from being able to really see how they are experiencing things. So this is where I thought the cycle of NSSI is a very helpful model for us to also have a better sense of actually what's happening for them and be able to acknowledge. We might not always agree, but acknowledging is actually important enough to help them to see that you value what they have to say, you see what they're going through. Yeah, so the part about validating the person's emotions, expressing empathy, this is very critical because like what I mentioned, actually there's a lot of emotional turmoil and distress that's happening for our youth who engage in NSSI. So this would be critical. And sometimes being able to talk it out and have their emotions named, actually that is also a part of being able to have them regulate and use healthier ways to cope emotionally. So another part is sometimes we might assume we know what they are feeling. I'm sure sometimes we don't intentionally do that, but if we really want to be more mindful in the choice of word, instead of saying, oh, I know how you feel, or I understand what you're feeling, what we can do is really to reflect objectively at a point, I can see that this is not easy for you. I can hear from what you're saying that, there's a lot they are going through. It also kind of reflects that more objectively and helps them to also potentially not feel dismissed in whatever that they have to share. Okay, give support and reassurance. So this is the other part, right? Because when you express concern, you listen to them actively, but at the same time, you want to also help to move them towards being open to be linked to resources, being open for more support to come in. So some of the things that are helpful in this part is really reassuring them that they are not alone. Now that you see what you can do to support, and you also are able to help them to see that there are other sources of support out there. And you also want to reassure them that, if they need, you are there to be able to help to maybe figure out what are the next steps to move forward. And if able to, maybe to also keep them safe. So for example, some might also be open to discussing ways of how to make the environment safer, right? To reduce the possibility of them engaging in NSSI again. So these are some discussions that could occur if they're open. And it's also back to the reassurance that you are there to provide support to them. And reassuring them that you'll be there to listen and all support whenever they are ready to share or act. So this is also quite critical because this is part of the pacing piece that is very critical for this population as well. And last but not least, this is quite critical because sometimes some of us, we might be too quick to agree or promise them to make them feel better, but actually from a safety point of view, we might not be able to guarantee it. Yeah, so for example, don't give false assurances or promises that, oh, I won't tell anyone, don't worry. But the truth is that if, let's say, there is really safety risk, you might definitely still need to get more support. Yeah, but what you can actually assure is you will not be spreading this around like gossip, right? Because I mean, definitely can be seen as a shameful matter for some of them, so they wouldn't want it to be shared to people that they have not given consent to as well. Okay, so some very brief physical first aid tips. So the first would be to know when emergency medical attention is really necessary. So you don't have to be trained as a doctor to know this. I think all of us we might have some brief understanding. I think the key theme of this is really to uh, possibly avoid overreacting. Yeah. So it's really to think about, at this point in time, actually, how severe is the wound? Is it really something we need to rush to hospital at this point? Or, is it something we need, maybe we just need first aid wound care? Yeah, so that's really looking at the severity of injury. There will be some injuries that definitely warrant more critical attention. Yeah, so for example, if let's say the cut is very deep, very wide, right? Or let's say the burn is really very huge, and a certain critical part of the face, there are signs that you have to be able to bring in the necessary medical professionals. If risk of death or permanent harm is high, and this is quite clear, call an ambulance and ensure that there is proper wound care if needed. Yeah, so this is quite important because sometimes when you know about it, it could be after the act has been engaged in. So you might then want to check actually how do they take care of the wound? Do they know how to take care of the wound? So that is actually quite critical to also ensure that it does not get infected as well. Okay, so with this, let me just take a pause and continue to see some of the questions. Hmm. Okay. Okay. I think maybe at this point, I can I can share. Maybe I can respond to some of these questions. Just respond to a few first. Because the next part that I'll be moving into is really breaking down a bit more as to the various situations that I mentioned just now that you could be facing, and how to apply this look, listen, and link in terms of some of the possible pointers. Yeah. So let me just briefly go through some of the questions first. Okay, I see there's this question about why most use self-harm or harm to release their struggles and not using like exercise to get the release or going for games. Okay, so this part, and I fully agree with this person, right? Actually, if you think about it, it's not that easy to harm ourselves also, right? I mean, biologically, that isn't what we are inclined or drawn towards, right? When we think about actually why most use such harm to release their struggles, so we are definitely, so whatever that I'm going to share, it cannot be taken as the same for everyone. Yeah, so I think you must be quite clear on that. But if we think about the other types of coping methods, right, it's really then back to the idea of, okay, firstly is whether you know they have tried. There's something that people have also supported them in trying. Yeah, so it could be a situation of I don't know, I never try, there might be other ways that I could use, but I don't know them yet. Yeah, so that's a bit more clear cut and straightforward. However, when we think about the act of engaging in self-harm, or at least we think about, let's say maybe cutting, for example, right? What is potentially attractive about the satisfaction it brings, right, is the immediacy of being able to bring down the emotional distress. So some of us, sometimes when we hurt ourselves accidentally, right, we realize that the pain doesn't persist all the most of the time because our body is designed in a way that when we detect that it's being hurt, we will then release the endorphins to help to protect ourselves from actually suffering for such a very long period. Yeah, so the immediacy effect of the biological function is something that actually is not something that other emotional coping methods can match up to so quickly. Yeah, and if you're in a very high state of distress, right? So for example, even if I were to do games, right, it takes a while, let's say for me to win the game or for me to experience certain incentives in the game, or if I exercise, right, there is also still that process of me to get to exercising. So the immediacy and the level of satisfaction might not be as quick. as this NSSI. So it is not about really, so if we look at it from that lens, maybe we can understand a bit about why, especially for those who are going through high levels of distress, they might not be able to have the bandwidth to actually take the effort to do something else at that point. Yeah, so this is something that perhaps could also why it's so difficult for them to engage in other emotional coping. And even if they try, it takes a while. Yeah, so we might not be able to immediately see that they can change maybe overnight, especially for those who are engaged in for a longer period of time. So it really gets down to really how the biological part works in relation to NSSI. Uh, yeah, okay. So, uh, okay, actually, I do see there's quite a lot of other questions that is really about how to respond to different ones that talk about NSSI in a certain way, right? So, for example, if let's say NSSI is done as a habit rather than a coping, how do I respond to that? How do we encourage them to stop when they start on their own? The link part is rejected. Mm, okay, tell you what, let me just go through maybe one more other question. Then I'll continue the rest of my slides first. Yeah, so that we ensure that because later on in the slides, there are also some part that could also answer some of the questions you have. Yeah, so I also don't want to be repeating myself, but let me just answer the other next question about someone once told me that they do NSSI as a habit rather than a coping mechanism. How do I respond to that? Okay, so for NSSI, okay, firstly, I think when the person shares that, we also need to find out a bit more, right? Because we're also not sure the context of why that is being shared. However, it is true that, so for people who have engaged in NSSI repeatedly over a long period of time, there would, firstly, if we think about a habit, right, there is a repetitive effect of it, right? And every time we think of a habit, there's also certain incentives that lie at the end of the habit. Yeah, so for those of you who might be familiar about how habits work, usually there are some triggers and then there is also a reward for it. So the person might not express to you directly there is a coping mechanism, but the function of NSSI might remain the same. What is a bit more concerning for someone who engages in NSSI as a habit though, is that there is a chance that as they keep engaging in NSSI, they get more and more desensitized to pain and they start to find more severe methods of NSSI to help them to feel better. Yeah, and sometimes then that in itself could also eventually then lead to more severe methods or even suicidality. Yeah, so to me, I'll be more concerned when someone says they do NSSI as a habit from that lens of the risk rather than the differentiation between habit versus coping, because we really need to understand what they mean and define as the term habit. Okay, so the rest are important questions. Let me go through them later, but let me continue first so that we are able to also help each other understand a bit more about the various situations that I mentioned just now and how we can apply this look, listen, and link. And, you know, there is a very valid question there, right? Because when you want to link someone to resources, they could reject. Yeah, and I think that's also quite painful for whoever who wants to really provide that support. Yeah, so I can understand that. Let's see whether we are able to cover a bit of that later. All right, so I thought I wanted to briefly highlight some of the key things to take note when we think about the various situations that I brought up. So just want to put a disclaimer. So I'm not saying that this applies to every single situation, but these are also based on some of the validated guidelines and also my own experience about what is usually something we need to take note about. So if you suspect someone you know is engaging in NSSI, what will you do? Right, I think I'll share also a bit more about some potential signs or symptoms that to keep a lookout for. Yeah, but let's say you already suspect that, okay, maybe this person, you know, is engaging in NSSI, because like what I mentioned, it is a concerning behavior. So it would definitely be best to find a chance to discuss it with them. However, before you even want to engage in any discussion of sorts, right, I think it's important to be able to acknowledge and deal with your own feelings about them engaging in NSSI. Because if not, some of this will definitely come out. And like I mentioned, it might not be also the most helpful for everyone who's involved in this conversation. Yeah, so if we think about the first L, which is look, so in this case, it's actually you need to be quite selective. Who is the best person to talk to this person? Is it really you, or could there be someone else that has a maybe a better rapport, or you know a person could feel safer with? that could actually engage in this conversation to increase the chances of the person being open to share, and also where to talk, right? So you ideally want to find somewhere that's a bit more private as well. Yeah, so when you listen, I thought there's a strategy here that's quite helpful for some of you who might find yourself in this situation, where you might want to ask in a way that shows that actually you understand a bit about NSSI. That means to say that if you remember what I said just now about NSSI being also possibly used to relieve some of their emotional pain and struggles, we could be asking about how, for example, we could be noticing that, they have been very stressed lately, they have been going through a lot emotionally, and we know that, sometimes when people are emotionally overwhelmed and they have no other ways to cope, sometimes they do resort to certain methods such as NSSI, and then you can ask the person whether that person has engaged in it. Yeah, so the difference with saying it this way versus just directly asking them about it could be potentially less threatening for them because they would know that you are not here to judge them. You can understand some of the dynamics and some of the reasons for NSSI, and they could then be more open to talk to you about it. However, there is a chance that the person might not want to talk. So, like what I mentioned, if the person doesn't want to talk, it's very hard for you to force the person to talk because you also want to respect his or her right. More importantly is you need to let the person know that you want to listen whenever they are ready and find out actually what will make them feel safe enough to discuss their feelings or their thoughts about this. Yeah, so unless, it's really a very bad situation, then if not, I would think it's really to be able to let the person, to pace with the person and let the person remain in control of their help seeking as much as possible. So you could be suggesting options, you could be really sharing some of the things that you find has been helpful rather than directing them on what to do. Yeah, so this other key part that's quite important is to refrain from expressing strong emotional response. Yeah, so this I find is actually one of the hardest in providing psychological first aid, emotional first aid for people who are engaging in NSSI. Because if you think about it, you care for that person, and that's why you are very concerned when you see that person engaging in NSSI. So sometimes the feelings that will come up could be anger, frustration, disappointment. However, if all these are being expressed, remember what I shared about that cycle NSSI, or even how that could potentially emotionally affect them. I think it's something we want to think about it from that lens, and also help ourselves to see that perhaps if we are not sure whether we can manage our emotions, maybe it's better to have somebody else to also kind of run this conversation or do it together with us. Okay, so explore if anybody else, especially professionals, know. Yeah, so actually, just now there was a brief question also, right, about how to help people be linked up to resources if they don't want to. I thought even before we ask that question, we also want to find out actually who knows about them engaging in these behaviors, right? Because perhaps some of them could be linked to a professional or certain could be getting support, but they might not want to share, or maybe you never ask them, so they never share. Yeah, so one is really want to explore who knows and tap on those people who know as also resources for you to be able to jointly encourage the person to seek more support. Yeah, so as best as possible, let the person remain in control of the help seeking. Because if we think about it, right, one of the potential functions of NSSI is about the sense of mastery and control. So if we also, unless it's the severe situation where safety is high risk, but if we also take away the control and force them to seek help, I'm also not too sure how much they can benefit from it. Yeah, so that's something that we also want to take note. And more importantly, we must show them the resources and let them know where they can turn to if they need support. Okay, so here are some potential signs and symptoms that could hint that towards this person possibly engaging or being at higher risk of engaging in NSSI. Yeah, so I'm not saying that if you go have this, you definitely are engaging in NSSI, so it's not. But if you think about it, actually it goes back down to also mental well-being struggles as well. So there could be impact cognitively, emotionally, socially, physiologically. Most of the time, what we tend to be able to see would be that in the behavior. Yeah, so for example, if you look that you see that, oh, actually there are some fresh cuts on the person's arm, or there are some scratches, bruises, bite marks that are happening a lot more than what they used to. Or the person actually keep wearing long sleeves and pants even in very hot weathers. Those are some signs that you might make you curious about actually what's happening. Or there are certain reports that they often get injured, they knock into themselves, they knock into things, a lot of accidental injury being reported. So those again are some signs for you to be curious. And this is a bit less common, but sometimes they might actually talk about how, oh, they want to distract themselves from all this pain through really going through things that are painful for them. Yeah, so those are some of the potential signs as well. But the key thing, if you think about the cycle of NSSI, I think it links a lot to emotional distress. It links a lot to emotional suffering. Yeah, it links a lot to the stresses that they are encountering and whether or not they have enough support. So if you know of people who are struggling, those are already people that you could be keeping an eye out for and really being able to support them with emotional coping or helping them to see how to regulate so that hopefully we're able to prevent any potential deterioration into engaging in the self-harm behaviors. Okay, so that's for the first scenario. The other scenario would be related to if somebody tells you that he or she is going to engage in NSSI, what will you do? Okay, so firstly, if someone tells you they're going to engage in NSSI, to me that is a potential cry for help, whereby actually they might not want to do it, but they can't see other way out of it, and they actually feel safe enough with you, and then tell you. Yeah, so most of the time I thought to me that's a good sign where there's a chance for you to provide more support and prevent it from happening if possible. Yeah, so you would want to actually take notice on how is the person like when the person is sharing you. Is the person very distressed? Has the person reached the panic stage, and maybe act in ways through the environment to support the person to feel better. So for example, if the person just suddenly tell you, it could be maybe meeting the person for a drink, if you are with that person, the person discloses, can you sit the person down, get a cup of water, help the person should be able to share in a more comfortable state as well. Yeah, and at that point in time, again, it's really expressing concern, expressing what's happening with the person, what's the person feeling, what is going through that person at this point in time. Actively listen and provide emotional support, and engage in other emotional coping strategies if possible. Yeah, so this is key because if you think about the cycle of NSSI, it is where it gets too overwhelming for them in terms of the emotional distress. So if at that point in time you can do something with them to bring down that emotional distress and prevent it from tipping over, actually that's helpful. So for example, if you can talk to them, right, you can co-regulate, attend to them as they talk about how they feel, that might actually help them to bring their distress down. However, all these things, right, it's very difficult for you to do if you are very emotionally triggered yourself. Yeah, so this is the part where refraining from expressing strong emotional response is very critical because you want to help them to share more, not you want to make them feel bad for sharing. Yeah, so this is where I think is quite key. Again, refrain from expressing strong emotional response. And after they have shared, right, hopefully, you are able to provide resources and support the person in help seeking. The best scenario for this is through your support, they also the urge to engage in NSSI goes down, and they are also more open to be able to seek more support because they already started to approach and take that step to even talk to you for further support. Okay, then we go into C. So this is the part that I think most people were quite stuck with. Very understandable because it's also a situation where we typically associate it with crisis, right? So if you happen to walk in to somebody that is engaging in NSSI. Yeah, so in a crisis situation, actually safety is the most important. Yeah, so you really need to assess the person's physical safety, what's the severity of the wound, do I need to call emergency services? If you're not too sure, at least you just call first and then talk to the person over the phone to see whether or not this is very serious. Yeah. The critical part actually is really the part on remaining calm. Yeah, because in a crisis, actually our own panic responses get heightened as well, right? So I think remaining calm, refraining from emotionally strong response, and really telling the person how you're worried about the person's safety. Yeah, so depending on when you catch the person, whether they have just engaged in it or in the midst of engaging in it, that could also influence how the person will respond to you. So they might be very agitated about it, maybe because of shame and all that, or they might not want to talk to you about it. So there could be silence. And this is the part that we just need to be prepared, and which is why it's important to regulate ourselves. And the key thing is also to provide reassurance and give space for the person to share when they are able to, when you have gotten them into safety. Yeah, so ideally, of course, unless it's a situation where you might not want to get into a situation where your own safety could be compromised as well. Yeah, so you might want to actually talk calmly to the person and really get the person to maybe put down whatever they are doing first and talk to you if you are concerned about what's happening. Because if you, let's say you snatch things over and all that, that sudden action could also cause an accident to occur. Yeah, so it really depends on the situation. You need to make certain judgments that will be the best judgment you can make at that point in time. So there's really there's not something that I think could be a key guide, but there is the thing that's always guided me is the importance of remaining calm, because then that is where you know that the decisions you make can be as objective as they can be. So the link part is really to bring the person to seek medical help, either provide resources, support the person in help seeking. Yeah, so if you happen to catch the person after the person has engaged in it, if you know of their cycle, right, the person might tend to be in a calmer state. Yeah, the sense of relief. So that's also then leading on to the next stage, right? Where either the person tell you or you actually saw the person just engaged in NSSI. So similarly, you need to still assess safety, wound care, is there a first aid kit? Can the person know how to take care of their wounds? Actually, and sometimes those who have engaged in SSI uh, for a while, they do know actually how to take care of their wound, but some might not. Yeah, so this is something you need to look into and how the person is feeling. So again, the critical piece for me in this stage is a strong emphasis to be mindful of what you say. Hopefully, it doesn't trigger more guilt, grief, or shame reactions in the other person. Yeah, because if going by the cycle, they definitely will already have some of this coming up, especially for them to tell you or for you to walk in on them. Yeah, so this is the part where again being calm and refraining from emotionally strong response, but really trying to understand what may have made them do it, understand their reasons, understand also maybe how they are feeling, and being able to also help them to maybe make sense about what's really occurring for them. Why may they have not shared with you before? Yeah, because sometimes you might have chance upon it rather than they come and tell you. So it's really providing assurance, exploring actually what support do they need now that they come and tell you, now that you know. So then the linking part is again similar to really being able to get the relevant resources in. The critical part about the linkage, right, is that it really depends a lot on the listening process. Yeah, so sometimes, right, when we are unable to successfully link the youth, it could be a situation of readiness, of course. It could be a situation of readiness. It could be a situation, perhaps, where the youth is distrustful of professionals knowing for bad experiences. However, our what is critical is if in the listening process, they are convinced and they know that you truly care, you really wouldn't want anything bad to happen to them, and they themselves also start to see that, oh, actually, if I continue to do this, it's not helpful for me. Then there will be a slight shift in helping them to be more and more open to being able to be linked up to further support. And sometimes their support, you need to also allow them to assess it as and when they think is best for them, including, for example, providing video resources first, where they can watch it on their own time. Yeah, so there are certain ways that we can scaffold the link part. But what I find is that if we jump too quickly into the link without establishing that listening and helping them to feel understood, helping them to feel that you care, and allowing them to also express openly and trust you, it's quite difficult for the link to be successful sometimes. So coming from a study, right, of some youths who have engaged in NSS, I thought this is quite helpful because it was a study looking at some of the responses that are helpful and not helpful from professionals and non-professionals. Yeah, so from a professional, what's helpful is if the professional is calm, listens with acceptance and sincerity. But what's not helpful is if the professional prescribes solutions without understanding the needs, or there's disapproval or judgment. Yeah, and I would think that this could apply to non-professionals as well. Yeah, which is why I shared the goal is not to solve the NSSI, but is to provide them support. Yeah, and similarly, I think non-professionals, providing tangible support, resources, listening to them, or maybe buying them a meal. Maybe we can chit chat over some good food, right? Acknowledging what has been happening to them without blaming, without emotionally charged responses, not caring about them, and also if somebody doesn't have a poor understanding of reasons for NSSI, it will come out in their behaviors, and youth will then find it not too helpful. Okay, so then coming on to the final piece, right? Because I know that there are, okay. Let me see the questions that are here. Okay, I'll just answer Annie's question first because it was just very linked to the previous content I shared. So I'll go into this and then let's spend the last 10 minutes going through the other questions. So is it helpful to take away the items that they use to cut themselves? Will they feel stressed if they cannot find the items? Okay, so this is a question that you need to unpack a bit, right? Because firstly, it is always best if you are able to have a discussion with them and get them to also see the importance of the safety risk and get them to also have a buy-in in you taking away the item that they use to hurt themselves. Yeah, because the key thing is, of course, you can take it away, but if there's no buy-in, if they don't see why you are stopping them, who's to say that they won't find another item? Yeah, so it's not so much about whether we can take it away or not, but really have we engaged them and have we helped them to see that this is actually we are worried for their safety and at least get them to acknowledge that okay, maybe that's true. While we can actually find and support you in finding other ways to cope, then let's do some things in your environment to keep you safe first. Yeah, because you're right, if they are stressed and they cannot find the items, then that's the part where they could resort to other methods. And then that might not be also our end goal as well. Okay, so coming to the last part, how we can provide sustainable support to resources and self-care. All right, so I think it's important to acknowledge our own feelings first. Right? I think I've been sharing a lot about what you can do, but the truth is that if you cannot support yourself, it is difficult for you to support the other person effectively. Yeah, so we need to acknowledge and care for our own emotions and know how to regulate our own emotions to be able to support them to regulate their emotions. It's a learning process. So it is normal to feel helpless, angry, upset. And what I find also are important factors that influence how strongly we feel, not only our views and perceptions of NSSI, but more importantly, our relationship with the person, right? If the person is your child versus the person is your client, there could be different feelings you experience. And also what are some of the expectations of what we believe people should be doing or not doing about NSSI. So expectations, managing expectations is also a very difficult one if we also don't know what our own expectations are. So when we think about supporting ourselves, we think about self-regulation, because I think one of the objectives, or at least what I hope that I could convey is really calm, immediate support, right? So providing calm, immediate support for the other person is going to be very difficult if you cannot provide calm, immediate support for yourself in that moment when you're caught unaware. So this is the part where I thought is important for all of us to also know some potential strategies to self-regulate. For me, what works the best is deep breathing. Why? Because I can do it at any point in time, and the effect can be quite instantaneous because it actually activates the parasympathetic nervous system in our body. It will activate the relaxation response and help me to reduce my stress physiologically. Yeah, so sometimes when we think of deep breathing, especially some of the youth that I work with, they would think not think too much about it, right? Because we keep talking about it. But I really want to encourage all of you, those of you who have not tried, to really be giving yourself a chance to try out this deep breathing in the proper way. Yeah, so it's not as simple as just breathing in and breathing out, but it's really about thinking. And if all of you could humor me to even put like your hand on your belly. Yeah, so think of your belly as a balloon. So when you breathe in, your balloon is expanding. So your tummy should be expanding forward. And then when you breathe out, then your tummy will be tucking back in. Yeah, so it's a bit different from what we intuitively know. And there are many different counts that out there in terms of different breathing exercises. So some could be breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, breathe out for 8 seconds. And you need to repeat maybe about 1 to 3 times. Yeah, so for me, whenever someone shares a news that is also really upsetting to me, I remind myself to do deep breathing at that point in time because I know that my emotions will go high. I know that I will start to feel physiological reactions and heart will start to beat very fast. So I want to do something that can bring my distress down. And that is something helpful for me to be able to do some deep breathing and activate certain systems in my body so that instinctively, automatically, it could trigger some of the reactions in my body to help to regulate the reactions that's happening within me. Yeah, so all of us can find something that works for us, and what works for us may not work for others. So this is something I encourage all of us to start to look into as well. So there are some resources that my team came up with previously. I just left them in the slides in case it might be helpful for some of you. So mindfulness, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. That's also quite helpful sometimes when we sit with silence. Yeah, so remember I shared that we also want to help ourselves be comfortable with silence because our youth might not want to talk to us immediately. So as we're sitting with them, actually this is something we can practice. So we can look out, look out for 5 things we see, right? So if everyone here, you are looking at your environment, you could be seeing maybe your laptop, the phone. For me, I see a notebook for writing down things later. Yeah, so looking at 5 things that you see, then identifying 4 things you can touch, being able to recognize 3 things you can hear in the room, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Your tongue maybe is the lunch that you ate just now. So this is something you can also do in the moment, especially maybe when you are sitting with the youth, and it's really also allowing yourself to give the chance for the youth to take their own time to talk as well. Okay, so gratitude is another potential helpful piece in supporting ourselves. So this could be likely afterwards, right? Because every time we support someone who is going through high emotional distress, or we support someone through a crisis, at that point in time, we are very focused on managing it. However, there will be emotional load within us. There is emotional labor that we have done. And I think being able to help ourselves to make time out to really pay attention to what went through within us, and also help us to stay focused on being grateful and doing things that help us to manage our mental well-being is very critical. Okay, box breathing is something that a lot of youths they like. So I'm just putting it here also because sometimes these behaviors and these strategies you use to regulate and support yourself are strategies you can also recommend to the youths that you work with or that you know. Yeah, so it's a bit similar. It's just that in this case of breathing, you think about a box. So there's you actually breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold, you exhale through your mouth for 4 seconds, and you keep doing it and reference it to as if you are drawing a box. Yeah, so 4, 4, 4, 4. Okay, so this is something that you can also think about doing as well. Okay, so coming to the last part about some resources that that I thought would be helpful to share. So there are resources, especially in the past few years, that are focused on NSSI. So I really encourage all of us to tap on them. So if you go to KKH website, I've just kind of done a snapshot of this. There's actually a manual on self-harm. So it's really like a psychoeducation manual, done in a very readable and youth-friendly manner. So you can also send to your youth also if you find that's helpful. So basically, it's general psychoeducation about what is NSSI, and I think this can be helpful for anyone to be more equipped with this knowledge as well. There's also a video that I worked with KKH previously. So myself and a clinical psychologist from KKH is a comprehensive video about why do teens self-harm, and there are some tips for caregivers in the video as well. Yeah, so this is something that you can again watch it for yourself, or you can send it to people you know that might be engaging in self-harm. You're not too sure you're sending it as a resource. So it also helps to destigmatize self-harm, and I think that's a valuable part of this video because at the end it encourages people who are watching the video to step forward to seek support if they require. And as I mentioned, right, it's important to connect with professionals because there's also a limit to what each and every one of us can do. And like what was being mentioned, the many helping hand approach is very valuable. So just listing some of the key resources for some of you over here. There are many community mental health services now under the AIC. So like Shine do run the youth community mental health services. So the best way I think to find them is this tool that I really like that was developed 2 to 3 years ago. So it's called the Community Mental Health Wayfinding Tool. Yeah, so you can just Google it. So within 3 clicks, it can bring you to the mental health service that you will need based on your type of need, your age, and where you stay. Yeah, so I find this quite helpful. So I want to share with everyone. So from there, there'll be a list of different agencies, and you can actually connect with them accordingly. Yeah, and of course, when you think of professionals, apart from community mental health, there's always the hospital side. Yeah, so that is usually where people turn to if they need more support. Like what I mentioned, we work very closely with KKH. They are in how and they do great work in really working with adolescents who also engage in NSSI. So there's also private options out there. I believe the last session, Dr. Kevin was talking about private therapies who do DBT. Yeah, so there are different options out there. And I think the key thing is really to know what fits your needs. So sometimes it could be budget, sometimes it could be related to the proximity, accessibility. Yeah, so there will be options out there. And once you are clear about where some of these options are, you can then communicate them to the youth that you are supporting. Or at the same time, you would then be able to talk to them first, right? To also inquire a bit more about what is there and then how do you do the referral process. But at the end of the day, like what is being shared, not everyone could be at different points in their help seeking journey. So what I find is really helpful is at least let's provide all our youth the 24/7 hotline so that they know where they can turn to at any point in time. And sometimes a lot of these negative thoughts and feelings can approach them like late at night. So then this is where the 24/7 hotlines is very valuable, especially for us helping professionals also, where we are able to also provide additional resources to other youths. Okay, so apart from therapeutic services, sometimes there will be community programs. This will be a little fewer for now, but I hope there will be more and more programs up and coming, especially when the need is seen as much greater now with the National Youth Mental Health Study. So for myself, actually, I led this program. It was a targeted prevention program for NSSI, and we were able to train peer supporters, volunteers to journey with youths who are at risk of engaging in NSSI through the lens of targeting protective factors instead. Yeah, so meaning to say that actually what are some of the upstream things we can do to be able to support and prevent deterioration into NSSI? Because for NSSI to occur, definitely you know that there are some struggles with emotional regulation and sometimes also with social interactions and social skills and social support seeking behaviors. Yeah, so this is really an example of how we could be looking at more and more community-based programs, taking a bit more of a targeted prevention approach alongside the interventive approach with the other services that were shared earlier. Yeah, so for now, the pilot, which is more focused on NSSI, has ended. So this program is continuing, but broadened up to greater profile of youth that's really looking at social and emotional challenges. Okay, so some of the key takeaways that I just wanted to sum up before I go quickly into Q&A is I hope what I've impressed about all of you today, really two things. I think the first is even before we want to think about providing emotional, physical, psychological first aid to someone who is engaging in NSSI or at risk of, we need to first reflect on ourselves. We need to first understand how we view NSSI, our attitudes towards it, our relationship towards it, because whether we are aware or not, it will impact how we respond. Or rather, if we are not aware, we might end up reacting, which is not always going to give the best outcome. Yeah, so that is something can be difficult, I know, but it's important, I think, for all of us to do. And the second would be that, be it the last session or this session, there's a lot of knowledge that we have actually provided. So for you to also digest and to then see how to apply this knowledge to help to guide you in the way you provide first aid. Yeah, so for example, cycle NSSI, when someone comes to you, you can have a better sense of, oh, how could it have started? Where is the person at? What is important for the person at this point in time? And also importantly, I want to support someone, but to what degree can I really be responsible for the person, right? Because we are also unable to be responsible for someone's behaviors and feelings and thoughts. It's not something that we can do that actually, as much as sometimes we hope we can, but we have to also learn our own boundaries and know what is beyond us as well. So if I were to then sum up into 4 key reminders for everybody, I think the first reminder is be self-aware so that you can consciously respond in a supportive, calm, and non-judgmental manner. It is very important, supportive, calm, and non-judgmental manner. Secondly, if understand the reasons, or you might not need to push to understand the reason that the youth you're supporting is engaging in NSSI. The person is not willing to share, but at least through our sharings, be it the sharing by Dr. Kevin or by myself, you will have some rough understanding of some of the potential reasons. Yeah, so you understand some of the potential reasons, remember the cycle, so that you can also approach in a them in a helpful way that could hopefully not perpetuate the cycle from occurring again and again. Yeah, so for example, refrain from blaming, minimizing, dismissing, guilt tripping, or try to solve their problems, or threaten them that if you don't do this, I'll do that, or try to force them, because it could just create in even more emotional distress and kickstart the whole cycle again. Thirdly, seek your own support when you provide support to others. This is very critical. I cannot emphasize enough of it. So make sure that you're well supported. There are people supporting you, even as you are working with the youth or supporting the youth in your own capacity. And more importantly, at the end of the day, safety is priority. Yeah, so as much as possible, we try to pace. As much as possible, we give space, we listen. But if let's say, it's in a situation where if you don't call the medical authorities, if you don't take action, the person's life could be lost. All this can be put aside. The most important thing is to get the medical help that the person requires. So at the end of the day, regardless of any self-harm, right, be it NSSI, suicide, actually safety is always the priority. Yep, so I just want to end with this quote before we go into Q&A, which is about it being a method that individuals use when they don't feel like anything else will work. At the end of the day, it's a survival mechanism for them. And then how can we help them to be able to find other better ways and be able to journey them and support them through as they recover from this. All right, so actually that brings me to the end of my sharing. And I believe we still have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A, and we can cover some of the other questions that's been brought up.
All right, thanks, Leon, for your wonderful presentation. Right. I will assume that all of us are behind the camera, so let's just give a round of applause. Yeah. No, I have to say that I think this has been very, very wonderful covering, right? And quite a lot of takeaways as well. I personally have two questions for you. And along the way, if let's say for any of you who have either posted the questions in Zoom but not addressed, feel free to post it again. Or if you have any new questions, just put in the Zoom chat for us. I'll keep a lookout for this. So I mean, Leon, I think just is I think we can stop share lah.
Oh, okay, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yes,
Let me stop share.
so that we all can see everyone's face as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so two questions, right? One is you mentioned the four scenarios, right? The A, B, C, D, and I think that was really very insightful and very practical for all of us. I'm thankful for that. I'm just wondering also, how should we handle or approach if we know of youth who is surfing online on how to self-harm, or they are in a digital space where there are circulation of self-harm materials, right? Whether it's a WhatsApp group, digital group, Facebook, whatever, where they would circulate information about self-harm. Then how do we approach that? I think that's my first question. Second question is something that I have come across, a few caregivers myself, in that they are caring for someone who have the history of self-harm, right? Yet you mentioned about how do we regulate our emotion, right? Especially on the immediate front. But I think many caregivers out there also would tend to have this consistent anxiety about when's the next time the person they care for will self-harm again. So then what's your input on how do they manage that level of anxiety? So those are my two questions. And for the rest of you, if you have questions, please continue to put in the Zoom chat. Right, I'll keep a lookout and read out later as well. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Alex. Let me try to answer your two questions. Then before I know I have some questions in the chat. Okay, I think the first question is a increasingly relevant question, right? And a very worrying question as well, showing I think really the intersection between the digital space. In fact, it's also really about how do they even gain access to it. And to me, if we were to then, but at least from how I look at it, be able to approach youth who are finding materials on NSSI through digital platforms, fundamentally, it also goes back to what might have attracted them to want to read these materials, right? Because it also goes back into what is their curiosity about it? Are they looking for ways to cope? What have they heard from their peers about it? And in fact, actually, it is a bit similar to also how they might learn about self-harm, even in the in-person world, right? In the real world where maybe their friends might have done it, they might have talked about it. Yeah, so however, I thought maybe what is more concerning is more about the age that they are exposed to such materials, right? So imagine if you are looking, then that goes into the whole discussion on also what kind of digital access is being given to children, right? And how are we able to manage that? So I might not have a very good answer to that. It actually leaves me more questions than answers. But if I were to just to ground myself, right, I thought something to really remind ourselves in such situations is firstly, don't make self NSSI a taboo topic. That means we must be able to talk about it. Yeah. So what happens is usually we don't, and therefore when they assess the material, they also have nobody to make sense with. So they take it as a way that they can use and they can cope when they try, and then that is actually potentially then leading them to really engaging in behaviors in the longer run. Yeah. So I think it's really to not be afraid of talking about it, and maybe we should generate more helpful digital platforms or maybe share more digital resources like what I shared, right? That can also be helping people have a better understanding and more accurate understanding of NSSI. Yeah, so
Yeah, thanks.
no problem. Yeah, so that's my brief answer to your first question. The second question was about caregivers, right? Yes, actually we do see that a lot as well, even in my work, right, where that persistent anxiety and worry of caregivers is very real. In fact, I always find that those who are really the most affected are the caregivers. Yeah, because this, I mean, imagine if it's your child or relative, there's so much more love and care and concern. Yeah, and it's very painful for any caregiver to be going through that. So I thought just two thoughts on this piece. I think one is really going back to the importance of support. Yeah, I'm not sure whether there are any support groups for caregivers who children engage in NSSI. Perhaps that could be one because it's also about being able to know that you're not alone and being able to also find out strategies from others about how they manage it. Yeah, so of course, then the other strategy that we often talk about in terms of drawing boundaries, right? Um, it's easier said than done, but I think something we need, at least for myself, what I think is important to note is not everybody who actually engages in NSSI wants to change their behavior at that point. It is a painful truth, but we are not trapped by that because we know the function of NSSI and we know that if we are able to support them to build their emotional coping in other ways and help them to see over the longer run that this behavior, while I can help you at this point, but it's not going to be helpful for you in the longer run, then that is some hope that we know how to be able to manage it. And then the second thought, I think is really about being able to know where your line of responsibility lies. Yeah, so at the end of the day, even as every professional, I always find that the greatest challenge we have is being unable to control people, right? If today we can control everyone, actually we won't have any issues. But true, the fact is that there's also value in allowing everybody to go through their own journey and being able to support them through it, and hopefully being able to also release some of the caregiver guilt, where it's not that you're not doing enough as a caregiver. It is unfortunate that your child might be starting to engage in NSSI, but not all hope is lost, and there have been situations where people do. In fact, I know of someone who has engaged over 10 years and she managed to stop. And the recovery journey has now become an inspiration for others. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think it's really to not lose hope in that period.
I think that's an important part, right? The not lose hope, right?
Mm.
I think as a follow-up from question from Annie, I'm not sure how detailed it was addressed during the presentation, but let's just bring it up one more time. Now, the idea of taking away the item they use to cut themselves, or we know of caregivers who hide them,
Mm.
right? So the question is this, right? First of all, will they feel stressed if they cannot find the item? And many other caregivers out there also have this concern when they find new items after that to self-harm too. So what's your thought?
Mm. Yeah, I think this is a good question. Just now I was sharing with Annie, it is a valid concern, right?
Mm.
Because if we think about why youth engage in NSSI, which is to relieve and support their own coping, it is very real that if you take it away from them when they don't have a say in it, there might be a chance that then they will go and find other ways. So for me, the more important part is, um, are we able to have a conversation with them for them to know our concerns about their safety and get their buy-in in keeping the environment safe? So that would be very critical. Yeah, rather than we just take it away forcefully because we could be removing more control from them and that might push them to want to take more control in other ways that's not helpful. Yeah, so even for us, let's say when we work with youth, we do safety planning with them. We will then also work with them to inform the caregiver so that everyone is involved and they know what is the plan that needs to be done to keep themselves safe and helping them to see that if they continue, we are really concerned for their safety. And if you think of NSSI as a connection-seeking behavior, actually in every use there is a sense of wanting to be cared for. There is a sense to want to belong and know that people are looking out for you. So I think really being very sincere and authentic about conveying that would be quite critical.
Thank you. One last call to everyone. If you have any question,
Yeah.
feel free to post in the Zoom chat. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, actually, I saw a few questions. Okay,
Oh.
I'll do my best to answer briefly because I didn't get a
Okay.
chance to answer just now. In the remaining time that we have, very briefly, just to make sure that every question is attended to. Okay, the link price. So I think there's a question about people not wanting to seek professional help. And as caregivers, how do we proceed after the 2 Ls for those who adamantly refuse help? Yeah, so I think this is the part where just now I also highlighted. Firstly, I think important is to think about how we have done the second L, which is to listen. Because most of the time, actually, the important work is in the listening. Because if you are able to help them know where you're coming from, and also know your concern for them, and help them to also start to see that actually the way they are doing this might not be the most beneficial for them and people who care about them, that could shift a bit about their openness. However, I think we also need to be realistic that everybody is at different journeys in help seeking. That's one. The other one is also we need to look at maybe who might be the best to position to get them to seek help. Yeah, perhaps for some reason, their friends could have greater influential power over them at this point. So if we get positive adult role models, apart from caregivers, to come on board, then that could be helpful, which comes back to the whole idea of encouraging them to share with other people so that they can get more sources of support so that it doesn't always fall on the caregiver trying to push the youth to seek support. Yeah, so I think that's just a very brief response to this very important question. And I think there's 3 more questions. You think we can? I will
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you taking time, so I'll just briefly, very brief ones, but there can be more conversations thereafter lah. So I think Annie also asked, how do we encourage them to stop? Will they eventually stop on their own? Yeah, so this is another very tricky question, right? Okay, will they eventually stop on their own? Just using my example of someone with lived experience that I know, who engaged in NSSI for 10 years, right? And she did stop. I do think it's possible. However, I would think that it's more important question to ask yourself about actually what kind of support we can put in now so as to help them to maybe stop earlier if possible. Yeah, so that's the part where I wouldn't say we leave it as is, but we still try to talk to them, pace with them. And how do we encourage them to stop? Sometimes it's also helping them to also see actually what are the long-term negative effects of it. Because most of the time for you, sometimes they're very preoccupied with what's happening now. But their long-term consequential thinking is not that strong. So that's where we can actually act as their prefrontal cortex to also check with them about, hey, if this continues and keeps on happening, will you be worried about your safety? Will you be worried about how, you might be perceived by other people, if let's say there are certain visible scars and all that. So I think these are some questions that we might be asking them so that's to help them to think for themselves as well. Okay, then the other last 2 questions. Lee said, how about a young girl who engaged in NSSI and show the photo but can still give us a smile as if nothing is serious? And how to help someone who self-harm due to stress around them. They will not be going away soon. Okay, so a very brief response to Lee is there are youths who do not see their NSSI behaviors as an issue. However, like I mentioned, it could be because it really helps them, and that's definitely a sad truth, right? But it doesn't mean that it's something that we dismiss, right? Because we also need to acknowledge that for them this works at this point. But more importantly, actually, what I tend to see is that for youths who will actually smile as they talk about them engaging in NSSI. Sometimes it's also their own defense mechanism because they have been judged and they have been blamed and dismissed and minimized such that they don't care about people's reactions and they purposely might want to be putting out a certain front to actually show that they are not affected, but they could be really affected inside. Yeah, so don't just take it as surface level. I think really but understand a bit more about this young girl and see actually what could be happening for her. That would be the most important for this question. And last but not least, help someone who self-harm due to stress around them that will not be going away soon. This is the part where I think linking to community mental resources is very helpful. Yeah, so for example, we can support them in building their emotion regulation strategies, learning how to ride the wave of emotion, learning how to tolerate emotional distress. These are actually interventions that are available by mental health professionals. So I would think if the person is open to working on their own stress and helping themselves to cope better with the upcoming A levels, for example, then linking the person up to community mental resources would be very helpful. Yes, and I think I've covered all the questions. I hope I have.
Well, I have one last question for you.
Okay,
If
yes.
anyone here who would like to seek services from Shine, how can they do so?
Okay. Yeah, if anyone wants to, you can actually go to our website, or there is or just now I think I shared that Ministry of Mental, so it's the social media platform link. So there is a link tree on my Instagram page that if you click it, you can actually be connected to a self-referral form. Yeah, so many of our clients actually they self-refer. So we allow caregivers to self-refer youths or even peers of youths to self-refer. Yeah, so you can connect with us through our website or our social media, and then we can work from there.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been so fruitful for all of us. Back to you, Dean. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you everyone for today. We hope that everyone has gained some insight from our 2 days talks. We hope that you will also spread the word, and hope to see you at any of CFL's events. We have come to the end of our self-harm prevention month talks, 2026. Thank you everyone. Have a great weekend ahead, and we hope to see you at our other events. Thank you. You may now leave the Zoom.
Thank you.